And lawyers, guns, and money.
Welcome back to Conduct Detrimental, episode number 58. The Carl Banks episode, number 58, the greatest New York Giant right outside linebacker of them all. He should be in the Hall of Fame. But in any event, we acknowledge his greatness on this broadcast. Joining me today, as always, is my co-host, Dan Lust. And of course, I'm Daniel Wallach. Dan, how are you today?
I'm good, and if anyone either forgets my name or your name, it's pretty easy. Just say Dan. One of us will respond to it. Dan, I am very good. Again, I feel like it's every week we have these new and interesting legal issues that pop up. Sometimes uncharted territory, as we'll get into, and then others stories that just have an interesting turn that we might not have seen before. But Dan, I'm ready to jump right into this. You ready for the rundown?
Yeah, what's the rundown? I think I have a pretty good clue since we talked about it before the show, but let's frame the episode for our viewers. I mean, we've had a pretty dynamic past couple of days, so why don't you lead with it?
Dan, that was the part where you're supposed to pretend that we didn't talk about this ahead of time and we're all setting this up, but it's okay. It's okay behind the scenes. Okay, so number one, we had a very eventful week last week. It was right after we recorded. It's the boycott season across sports. It started in the NBA and made its way around a number of different sports. We want to get into the legal ramifications of that, exactly what transpired and maybe what is in store for the future. Number two, the story that Dan and I, we dedicated an Instagram live to. If you missed it, it's available on my feed. We also have it on our YouTube feed. But that's this Nebraska lawsuit, these players suing the Big Ten. So we're not going to dive into, all the issues we addressed, but the new development, there has been a response filed by the lawyers for the Big Ten. So we want to get into that. There's a couple more developments in Big Ten in this past couple of days as well. And last but not least, a story that we've hit a few times, but we keep going to that well because they keep leading us there. That's the Washington football team. Every time we bring them up, Dan, I feel like it's with something negative, but it's ripe ground because if you were a professional football team, you're one of 32, you're in that spotlight. So we're going to go over the newest development in Washington football team hot water. So that being said, Dan, let us start with what I'm calling boycott season. Started in the NBA with the Milwaukee Bucks. They were supposed to play game 5. Was it game 5? Yeah, game 5 of the NBA Finals against the Orlando Magic. There were reports earlier in the day that there was potentially some talk of a boycott with different teams, be it I think it was the Sixers and the Celtics. But the first slate of games that day was going to be game 5 of the first round of the Magic and the Bucks. So the Magic were on the court ready to play. No Bucks. Bucks were in the locker room. And the Bucks decided not to come out. Word went to the Magic. The Magic apparently just said, we're not ready to accept a forfeit. We're not going to do that, but we'll leave it to the powers that be. So that spurned from that decision not to play. Call it a boycott. I'm not sure if it's a strike yet at that point, but that led to the statement being released by the commissioner's office in conjunction with the union that they were canceling. That's my dog, Harper. Well, she likes to make a certain cameos, but that led to an appearance from a joint statement from the union and the league that the rest of the NBA games would be postponed until further notice. So those didn't resume again until it was Saturday. Meanwhile, postponements or boycotts, whatever you want to call it, started taking place in the Major League Baseball, in the NHL, as well as the WNBA. So Dan, we should kind of unpack it, but what were your overall thoughts as this was unfolding?
Well, I mean, it's interesting to see the reactions and the expedition or lack thereof by the different leagues. You see the NBA taking a leadership role right away because the clear line of authority and respect for Commissioner Adam Silver, who may be, the most progressive and who gets it commissioner in the history of professional sports. And he has a great working relationship with the NBPA head, Michelle Roberts. So the quickness and the on-messageness of the NBA is, I think, a reflection of the leadership and the partnership, truly a partnership that they have with the players. By contrast, the NHL played their games that night. No statement from the players, nothing, a complete radio silence from NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman and the rest of the leadership. And then, of course, a day later, it took a few of the players
Vander Kane in particular,
Yeah,
from the
Vander Kane in
Sharks.
particular,
Mhm.
and I think one of the Minnesota Wild players, was it Dumba? I'm not sure I have his name correctly. It took some of the African American significant players in the NHL to basically rally the cause. When Gary Bettman probably should have been front and center on this early on, and it is a disgrace that the National Hockey League forget playing games, but did not even address the issue. But I give them credit. A day later, they were able to at least move fairly quickly with a similar decision to cancel games. So I think the league does deserve a little bit of credit after initially fumbling the snap.
So I think we'll say if there's any comparison, it's not really, but a couple of years back with the Donald Sterling situation with the Los Angeles Clippers, at the time that was the Lob City Clippers. That was Chris Paul and Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan. And while I remember this well because there was a lot of conversations like Dan, you and I are having. What should the players do? How should they protest this ongoing Donald Sterling thing? So there was talk potentially of them boycotting that game, and they were coincidentally playing the Golden State Warriors pre full out dynasty. And the Warriors said, "Whatever you guys do, we're willing to go along with it." So back then, the Clippers decided we're going to play, but we're going to turn our warm up jerseys inside out and then like throw them into the middle of the court. Which I don't. I mean, listen, I'm all for player empowerment. I'm all for players making demonstrations if that's it's their sport, stuff that's what they want. I'm not sure if throwing a jersey in this warm up jersey in the middle of the court and then playing says as much as a full boycott and not playing. So, kind of why we wanted to address this on the legal level. First, as Dan kind of notes, how did this issue get solved? It's Adam Silver, a lawyer, and Michelle Roberts, the head of the Players Association. She's also a lawyer. Those guys getting together and hammering these issues out. Now, whether you want to call this a boycott or a strike, and there's a particular term that applies here, it's called a wildcat strike. That's when players are striking and making a labor demonstration without the consent of the union. And by all indications, that's what occurred here, that the Milwaukee Bucks, whoever was organizing it, be it Giannis or whoever was actually doing it behind the scenes, that the full union was not on board, which would classify this technically as a wildcat strike. Still, though, in order to be a strike, just using common sense, you have to be striking against your employer with some type of action. You want something from your employer, right? Or else you're just striking in general. So initial reports from the Milwaukee Bucks locker room is that they wanted to speak to the the Wisconsin legislature, and they wanted to make social injustice change. Still, to me, just looking at it, I don't really think you're striking against the NBA at that point. And over the next 24, 48 hours, word came out that once the union all got on the same page, they had this big conference room. I think it was 250 people in the room, from Pat Bev, who had his own little controversy, and LeBron, and Kawhi, and Chris Paul. All the players were together in the room, and they came up with a kind of coordinated plan. And the highlight of that being they wanted NBA owners to provide their empty arenas, for polling places for the upcoming election. So that's more of a demand that was made toward the NBA owners. And then again, Dan, just to your point, Adam Silver turned it around really quick. We're not necessarily going to know the exact parameters of that deal, but something was hammered out behind the scenes because just if you were following the news, like you guys, Dan and I do every notification I get on my phone. LeBron and Kawhi, not necessarily them, but the Lakers and the Clippers in these informal polls were choosing not to play when the rest of the teams in the bubble were going to move ahead. So you don't go from that. And also LeBron dropped an F-bomb. He said, F this, when he was pissed about something. You don't go from we're not playing to back on the court on Saturday without some giant concession. So I don't think we've seen the end of this story. I think there is some big concession that was made on the NBA's part. What do you think?
But in the end, I think we've come a long way. I mean, consider where things stood 3-4 years ago when Colin Kaepernick took a knee. It cost him his job, his livelihood. NFL owners were, against any notion of disrespecting or kneeling during the national anthem. And here we are 4 years later with the Black Lives Matter movement and the recent police-involved shootings of minorities under very bad circumstances, that you have the NFL and Roger Goodell doing an about-face, a mea culpa, nearly 4 years later. And it shows the power behind, player unity, and more than just one or two players stepping up. It went from Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed to an entire cross-industry movement. And when the vast majority of your employee base are African Americans, you're going to have to listen to them. And during these changing times, it's not only tone deaf, but it's disrespectful to your entire workforce and a significant amount of your customer base to turn a blind eye to it. So I think we're entering a new time or a new era of player empowerment in the civil rights arena. And especially if President Trump gets reelected, I would expect, and again, I'm not trying to be political here, but I would expect that this issue will intensify over the next 4 years. Does it go away if Joe Biden is elected? No, not necessarily, but I think the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, and the issue and the player empowerment movement is alive and well, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this going forward. And I think you and I talked a little bit about how maybe some of these issues could be collectively bargained for, so that instead of having an occasional one-off game cancellation, there could be some CBA provision that addresses this issue and provides at least a process by which the players and the league can agree on social justice statements and potential, cancellation or postponement of games.
So, Dan, I think, I think that puts it a good bow on this boycott situation. I think to your point, Dan, this is not in the world that we live in today with player empowerment. I don't think this is the last we're going to see of potential boycotts and strikes as an agent of change. I will say, and I heard, a big fan of, the Ringer podcast. Bill Simmons had a really good point on his interesting podcast and his last podcast. People like you and I, Dan, we talk a lot about sports, and a lot of people in the country, right, they turn their minds off and they watch basketball because they really want to watch the games, or, baseball or hockey and whatnot. But the absence of sports for that particular day, right, and the slate of games for the NHL's the next day, and the Brewers sitting out in baseball, Mookie Betts taking, him sitting out of the lineup, that's going to require people to have some of these uncomfortable conversations. So whether you fall on the left or you fall on the right, this brings a exponentially more attention to this issue than I think what happened with the Clippers. And I think if you're Chris Paul, I think you'd want a do-over than throwing your jerseys in the middle of the court and playing. And Dan, mind you, Clippers lost that series to Golden State. They weren't probably in the right mindset to play with everything going on. So I think it's important just, to understand that this landscape, as much as Dan, you and I'm not, the most political person in the world. I play kind of down the middle, but at this point in sports and politics are kind of intertwined. We have politicians coming in, we have players making demonstrations. I think that's kind of this new normal of 2020.
Absolutely. It's a good way to end this. I think this is going to be a recurring story. And whenever there's a police shooting of a minority, I mean, it just seems to be happening with fairly frequent occurrence, even during these times, shockingly. So we haven't seen the last of these, and I think it's about time that sports mirrors the debate in society.
At this point, whether ready or not, politics are in this conversation. And